found that visitors who see Tom in the act of hewing logs they can't relate because it's work. But actually, that's what Charles Ingalls would have known how to do.
Welcome to Land of Laura, the irreverent yet scholarly podcast about all things Laura Ingalls Wilder. Kitty Latané is a tin craftswoman, author, and historian. She's lived in Pepin, Wisconsin, where Laura Ingalls Wilder was born in 1867, for over 40 years. Kitty is not just a Pepin resident. She also loves the Little House books. She and her husband, Tom, have been part of the foundation of Pepin's annual Laura Ingalls Wilder Days since the festival's inception in 1991. And that's just the start of it. I think of Kitty as so integral to the village of Pepin that I asked her if she'd do me the honor of writing the foreword to my Land of Laura travel guide to Pepin, and she did. Today, she's on the podcast to tell us about the village of Pepin, as well as all the Laura Ingalls Wilder projects she's been involved in over the years. And just as a note, the vast majority of my recordings are remote, and this is one of those recordings where the connection wasn't quite perfect. So the sound may not be completely pristine, but you can still understand it. Kitty Latané, welcome. I am so glad that you agreed to come to the studio.
Well, thank you for having me.
As you may know, if you have listened to the podcast, what we ask everybody first is their Little House origin story. Could you share your Little House origin story and perhaps how it has informed your adult life?
Well, I was introduced to Laura Ingalls Wilder in the second grade. I grew up in Minneapolis, and my teacher read Little House in the Big Woods and Little House on the Prairie out loud to us. And let me give a strong endorsement of reading out loud to children. I absolutely loved that. And hearing the words as I was learning to read made learning to read so much more meaningful. I loved those books, but I was not drawn into the series as an 8-year-old. I had Ginny dolls, which were little girl dolls that were popular in probably more the 50s than the 60s. They were before Barbie, and they were just little girls. And I had two, and my two little girls went west out in the backyard of my parents' house. And they traveled in a little wagon made out of a fruit basket, and it was pulled by a donkey that had been borrowed from the Sunday school nativity set. And they had grand adventures. Then later, maybe as a 6th grader, I got into reading the series, and a friend and I kind of raced through, and she finished These Happy Golden Years first. But I went to the card catalog at school and looked up Laura Ingalls Wilder, and I found another book on the way home, which was in the nonfiction section. So it wasn't lined up in the fiction section with all the Little House books. So I got one more book in, and I won the race. So
you bested her thanks to the card catalog.
That's right. And that was my introduction to the distinction between fiction and nonfiction. And I remember discussing this probably more with my mother than with the librarian, but with adults in my world and understanding those categories. And I think at that time, because I read On the Way Home, I learned that Rose Wilder Lane was still living, which was kind of a point of interest,
I bet.
We all wonder what happened next, and so that was kind of exciting. At about the same time, I had the opportunity to travel in Portugal with my parents, and we went to a restaurant that was noted for its roast suckling pig. And Laura was with me, and I said, "Oh, do I get the tail?" And I remembered her description of that lovely, crispy, tasty pig's tail. And the waiter was charmed by a cute little girl and brought me a special plate with this little pig's tail on it. And I was not charmed. It was not at all the delicious, crispy treat I had imagined. But the memory stayed with me. And when I went to college, I was thrilled to find the college card catalogs and reference sections. And although I was not fully engaged with Laura Ingalls Wilder all the time, it was in my mind enough that I did a search for Rose Wilder Lane and found some of her articles from the 1920s in periodicals that were still in the library. So I was able to read something about her smuggling money through the Balkans across borders. Don't quote me on that. I don't remember all the details. And then another thing that happened at that point in my life, the first 4 years was published, and I was quite excited about that and quite disappointed in it. I went on with my life doing other things. I grew up in Minneapolis, and it never occurred to me to go to Laura's home sites. We traveled as a family, but I guess doing book home sites wasn't in our travel itinerary.
So how did you end up in Pepin?
When I got married, we wanted to live in a rural area, but close enough to my family so that we could visit without making a major expedition. It's close enough to drive up to Minneapolis and come back in the same day. So we took a compass and drew a circle, and Pepin had several things going for it. Tom and I both are involved in traditional handcrafts. So there was already an existing arts community that seemed like it would be congenial for us. The village of Pepin had a school, a grocery store, and a hardware store. And, of course, Laura Ingalls Wilder, which I wasn't, it wasn't that I was looking to move to a Laura Ingalls Wilder home site, but, that gave Pepin an edge.
So tell me what makes Pepin such a special community.
It's an old community. A lot of the old families in Pepin have been here since the 1850s. They're sort of the same wave of immigration that brought the Ingalls and Carpenter families to Pepin. Because it's on the Mississippi River, there has always been traffic. In fact, there were tourists coming to Pepin in the 1860s, 1870s. One of the memoirs I read, the man writing said, as a child, he would collect agates on the shore of the lake and put them in a little jar with water so they looked shiny, and he'd sell them to tourists who got off the boats. So there is that history, but it's also been a popular fishing lake for generations. So people have cabins and come every summer to go fishing. And it's got a sailing marina, so people keep sailboats here and come in the summer to go sailing. And now in the last few years, Pepin has become sort of a destination wedding town. There are several venues for weddings, from really high-end to very casual country.
And one of the things I really love about Pepin, which I think I've even talked with you about, is the restaurants. The restaurants are probably the best of any little house home site, if I'm comparing.
Yeah, when we first moved to Pepin in the 80s, the owners of the Harborview Cafe were gifted chefs. These people were artists. And they emphasized buying locally grown produce and meats, but at the same time, they'd ship fish in from the coast. And when we traveled, and we have traveled, Tom and I, a good bit over the years, if we'd go to another place, there were two things people who had heard of Pepin would know. One would be Laura Ingalls Wilder, and the other was the Harborview Cafe. They had wide reputation, and the King of Jordan ate there, and Billy Graham ate there.
Wow.
But there are several excellent restaurants now, and Pepin benefits by being a small enough town that it isn't a draw to franchise restaurants. So the people who open restaurants are more interested in serious home cooking.
That's wonderful. So I imagine that living for many years in a home site town has its positives and negatives. And I'm sure as a fan, you probably see both of those. What are the great parts? What are the not so great parts?
Well, I guess in Pepin, although this is the birthplace of Laura Ingalls Wilder, I don't think that's central to the identities of the population. It's sort of, that's interesting, rather than that's who we are. And I have heard a number of people, both residents and business people, they're concerned that sunbonnets are representative of the community when they don't wear sunbonnets. That just isn't how they see themselves. In Pepin, at certain times, like the big festivals, parking gets to be challenging.
I have experienced that.
Yeah, right.
Like during Laura Ingalls Wilder days in September.
That's not an insurmountable problem, and I think every year there's an attempt to try something to see if it works better.
So I've heard a couple of things about the Pepin Library, and I am embarrassed to say that I have actually never been inside. Is there some kind of Laura connection with the library?
Yes, indeed. The library was started in the 1940s by a group of just amazing women who...
It's always women.
It was like little town on the prairie. It was a small town, people working together to build a community. And so these women started the library, and it was housed in the village hall. In the early 1960s, a librarian in St. Paul, whose name was Reba Wakefield, wrote a letter to the editor of the local newspaper. At that time, there was a newspaper in Pepin, the Pepin Herald, and she said, "People in Pepin, this Laura Ingalls Wilder is a significant writer, and her book is set in Pepin. And I've been to Pepin, and nobody knows anything about it. You should show a little more interest." The village board discussed this letter and assigned the library board with the task of doing something. So the library had a couple missions. The first mission was to figure out exactly where she had been. There were some clues. I think even Reba Wakefield, the librarian, had been digging around a little bit. And Laura mentions the Hewlett family. I can't remember if she mentioned any other names in Little House in the Big Woods, but they kind of knew it was up in the vicinity of Berry Corner. So the library board reached out to all the area landowners and asked them to go through their abstracts. At that time, property owners had a paper abstract that they could page through going back to the original land grant, and Mr. Merlin Anderson found Charles Ingalls on his abstract. So that was project number one. Project number two was to change the name of the village park to the Laura Ingalls Wilder Park, and the library board engineered that, and there was quite a big celebration for the dedication of the park under a new name. And then it was about 10 years in the 70s when a group of people gathered again on the library steps to saying they needed to have some kind of organization to promote Laura Ingalls Wilder. And again, it was these amazing women. I think they're all gone now, but they were, I think, mostly women who had finished raising their families and were dedicated to adding more to community life in Pepin, but they decided to start a society. One of the people that I visited with a bit was Elizabeth Yankee. She said that she and her husband decided to take a trip to Mansfield, Missouri. While they were there, they would find out what kind of organization they needed. Elizabeth Yankee said, anybody who would agree to be the president of the new organization could come along with her and her husband. So Marie Lund agreed to go along, and they went to Mansfield. And I do not have a written confirmation of this, but I think Elizabeth had told me that there she met Bill Anderson, who was, of course, in the early 70s, just a young person, like the rest of us who are no longer young. But anyway, They got good advice and guidance. They came back, and Marie Lund became the president of the Laura Ingalls Wilder Memorial Society. At that time, it was pretty much run out of people's houses. There was no physical location, but the organization was given 1 acre of land, and the local commercial club purchased 2 more acres from the landowner so they could build the wayside. And that was the next big project. And in the late 80s, they purchased the building that is now the museum, part of what is now the museum. They purchased a second building that was next door and then built a new addition. So that has been an ongoing project. But it started with the library and these amazing women. Something that always comes up in conversations about the early days is that the library board organized pennies for Laura, and they went to all the area schools and solicited penny donations, and they would get checks from these different schools. That was kind of the foundation of their finances.
So the Laura Ingalls Wilder Memorial Society was established with pennies. I love that.
Over the years, the museum, the Laura Ingalls Wilder Memorial Society, has changed directions several times. When we first moved to Pepin, there wasn't a museum, and there wasn't a Laura Ingalls Wilder Days.
And did you have something to do with the establishment of both?
Oh, a little bit. Yeah, in 1985, the railroad depot was slated to be demolished, and we were involved in an organization that moved it up to the park. The first season, Laura Ingalls Wilder Society was sharing that space with the Depot Museum organization, and it was a little too small for that. But I do remember going to see Bill Anderson and Barbara Walker signing books at the Depot Museum.
Oh, wow.
We did not have an active part in setting up the museum. The people who were most active in the 1980s were, as is often the case, senior citizens who were full of enthusiasm and had many artifacts. And it seemed like when the space was made available, they moved in and set up the museum in very short order. And it kind of sat for quite a few years without much change. And now over the last 10 years, I'll say, or certainly since COVID, there's a lot more active management of the museum and changing of displays.
And haven't you been involved in exhibits at the museum?
Well, Tom and I both have done several exhibits at the museum. Tom hewed logs, which is interesting. Laura talks about Charles Ingalls building a log cabin. She doesn't go into a lot of detail about how he got from a log to a building material, but that's quite a process. And I have found that visitors who see Tom in the act of hewing logs they can't relate because it's work. But actually, that's what Charles Ingalls would have known how to do.
So is just so I understand, hewing logs, is that sort of to make them more uniform so they can stack better?
Well, a fully hewed log is square rather than round.
Sure, yeah.
A log cabin built out of round logs, especially with the bark on, is a pretty slipshod, short-lived structure. People who were building log cabins to actually live in would hew the logs into a square, and then they would cut joints that were secure so that the logs would not fall off the cabin. Anyway, he hewed logs and set up a log cabin corner. It's on exhibit in the museum for visitors to see, and I put together a little booklet with photographs showing the process.
Oh,
although
fantastic.
I find that people can't really relate. I think if they're Laura Ingalls Wilder fans, they should relate.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about hewing logs, but now that you say it, it makes sense, and I want to see that display.
Oh, come on to Pepin.
I know. I would love to come to Pepin. It is such a sweet place. I love spending time there. So the museum is in town, and the wayside where the cabin is about 7 miles outside of town.
Yes, that's right.
Just so listeners are clear if they haven't been there before. And also in town, just down the street from the museum, is the Laura Ingalls Wilder Park, where Laura Ingalls Wilder Days takes place every September, the second full weekend of the month. Right. And there's music and fiddle music and a spelling bee and a Laura contest and food and a 5K race. And Kitty, there's a part that you've been involved in for a long time. Can you tell us about that?
Tom and I have been involved since the first Laura Ingalls Wilder Days in 1991. And our primary project has always been organizing traditional crafts demonstrations. Tom is a blacksmith, and I guess he has also done some woodworking at Laura Ingalls Wilder Days. And we know people who do a number of the traditional handcrafts that just are not seen that often anymore. Anyway, we have a village then of different craftspeople set up in 19th century clothing and demonstrating 19th century crafts. I demonstrate spinning wool into yarn, and I also demonstrate tin work, which is sort of an 18th and 19th century craft because the tin worker would have to buy metal that had been prepared into sheets in order to make things out of it. We have people who do detailed fine carving, and we have a woman who weaves fishing nets. Always a camp cook, family that has built a log cabin during the weekend. They set up with weaving and rope making. There's a tomahawk throw and a flint and steel fire starting contest. And there's a man who makes arrow heads, a flint napper. So anyway, a nice variety of craftspeople.
I'm pretty sure that my son was very enthralled by the flint and steel.
Okay.
He's a fan of fire,
Yeah.
as a lot of little boys are.
Yeah, well, that's how Tom got started.
Okay. Okay. So tell me about your craft work. How did you start working with tin?
Okay. Well, I have to start with Tom because he's a blacksmith. He heats metal, sometimes very large pieces of steel or iron, and changes their shape when they're hot enough to be softened with a hammer. And I was more interested when I married in fiber arts, but I was surrounded by all this metal and all these metal tools. I tried blacksmithing, and I guess I'm a little wimpy because I see a lot of women who are very effective, efficient blacksmiths, but I wanted something a little lighter, and so I gravitated towards tin. Tinware was a consumer good. The Ingallses would not have made their own, although Pa did punch holes in a can to make a carrot grater because he had those 19th century eyes that needed something and saw something he could use to make it.
So do you make things in tin then?
I make things out of tin, and I have made a number of cups, tin cups, which are a symbol of American pioneer life. And I've made all sorts of lighting devices, lanterns, candle holders, sconces. At the time of Laura's 150th birthday, I made several custom lanterns with Happy Birthday Laura message punched into the tin. It's tin-plated steel, so it's got the strength of thin steel, but the tin protects the steel from rust, and the tin is food safe and doesn't impart flavor to your food. And if you wander around antique stores, you see many items that were handmade by tinsmiths besides cups and lanterns. Tinware was the Tupperware of the 19th century. Food storage containers, small for sugar, large for flour. Those containers would protect the food from vermin and from humidity. Probably my biggest market is in smaller Christmas ornaments.
I have one of your ornaments.
Okay, so you know about that.
Do you still have a shop in Pepin?
We do have a shop in Pepin. We're of an age that our hours are a little less predictable. I guess we say by chance or appointment. We work there. That's where we make stuff. But it seems like we have always a conflict, like on weekends when tourists might be wanting to drop in. We also have events or other activities, so we don't necessarily stay around. People are wise who call and make sure.
And what is it called so listeners know?
T and C Latané. T as in Thomas, C as in Catherine, Latané, Latane.
So what other Laura Ingalls Wilder related activities were you involved in?
I organized several other activities for a number of years. I ran a little essay contest with the title, How Laura Ingalls Wilder Influenced My Life. And that is something I have observed. Like, I gravitated towards Pepin because of Laura Ingalls Wilder. People feel her influence as they move through their lives, and that's something I have loved about Laura Palooza, because we have people who have followed different professions, but they sort of apply their knowledge. Barb Bosted and the Weather is a good example of a very professional person who applies her knowledge to the Little House books and enriches our understanding of the books because of her expertise. So that's one thing I did. I organized a slide presentation of the village of Pepin at the time of Laura Ingalls Wilder that I presented during Laura Ingalls Wilder days for several years, and then ultimately made it into a recorded presentation that is available in the museum now.
And you also co-wrote a book called The Village of Pepin at the time of Laura Ingalls Wilder, correct?
That's correct, and it is also available in the museum gift shop. It's perhaps a little dry. It's, again, my perspective on Laura Ingalls Wilder is that she is a portal into the 19th century. So when I moved to Pepin, I was not looking so much at the book Little House in the Big Woods to find clues. I was looking at what was here in the village and wondering, what did she see when she was here? And I was able to identify a number of structures and businesses and people who had lived here at the time that she was living up by the wayside and was coming into town to go shopping.
So The Village of Pepin at the time of Laura Ingalls Wilder by Catherine Latané and Martha Coleman is available at the gift shop at the Laura Ingalls Wilder Museum in Pepin. And I know you say it's dry, but I really enjoy it. And I think any Laura Ingalls Wilder fan who is interested in Pepin will enjoy it as well. There are illustrations, there are photos of buildings, there's a map of the town. It will be a wonderful addition to anybody's Little House library who doesn't already have it. And that book is available at the museum?
It is available at the museum.
Okay. And how have you been involved with the Memorial Society?
Always a little peripherally. I've never been on the board, but for 10 years I wrote the newsletter, which was a lot of fun. I had the chance to interview several of Laura's cousins, and of course I was doing that research on buildings at the time that Laura Ingalls Wilder lived here, so I did articles about the village at the time, and there was always something of interest to put in the newsletter. When I was getting essays for the essay contest, I would run those essays, the winning essays, in the newsletter. But I have to say, one of the reasons I stopped doing the essay contest was that I really hated judging them. Everybody had a wonderful story, and even those that were not chosen to win because they weren't expressed in as accessible a way, they were winners. They sat down and wrote those essays, and they thought about it, and they had good ideas and reasons that they were influenced.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. So let's talk about Lake Pepin for a minute.
I would say that Lake Pepin is like another character in the story. Maybe not Laura's story quite so much, although, of course, Lake Pepin makes its appearance because of the story of the picnic on Lake Pepin and the pebbles and the ripped dress.
Have you ever filled your pockets with pebbles?
No, that's not my thing. But, you do keep your eye peeled, especially in spring after the ice goes out and the shore has been churned up a little bit. People do find agates and arrowheads. So time spent walking along the shore, it's not time wasted.
So is that a good tip to go in spring if you want to find anything cool along the shore?
I think so. I think the ice in winter does change what's available. Mm-hmm. By fall, things have been picked over.
So can we talk about the ice? I know that everybody wonders, and, of course, the earth has been warming, but does the ice actually freeze?
The ice is good and frozen now. Last week, after a thaw, the ice was really good because there was no snow on top, and the ice boat fleet was out, and they go all over the lake with ice boats.
Tell me what an ice boat is.
An ice boat is a type of sailboat. I guess maybe calling it a boat is misleading because it doesn't float. It has runners like skates, and generally it's kind of triangular. Anyway, ice boating has been a popular winter sport on Lake Pepin. For many years, the village of Stockholm plowed a road across from Stockholm to Lake City, and people would actually drive across Lake Pepin.
In cars?
In cars. Words of wisdom in the ice fishing community and maybe in the law enforcement community is no ice is safe. Never should assume that ice is safe. But I've walked across the lake a number of times, and my rule of thumb is if I'm following a car track, a fairly fresh car track, I'm probably okay. And that has served me well so far.
That's your rule of thumb? I mean, it sounds pretty wise.
Something that I don't think Laura got right. I have not studied the science of ice, but on a fast-moving river, when it begins to thaw, the ice will break up and the current will push that ice downriver. On Lake Pepin, the most noise I have heard is when it's really cold, and because the water expands as it freezes, when it's really cold, the ice is freezing deeper and deeper and pushing up, and that causes compression cracks. So the ice is more likely to make a lot of noise when it's really cold on Lake Pepin. In the spring, when it thaws, it just gets kind of mushy. Generally, the ice breaks up when the first barge goes through and kind of goes up on top of this mushy ice, and the weight just pushes it down and breaks it apart. And once the boating channel is open, then it pretty much breaks apart.
Well, I'm dying to talk about your newest, I guess project isn't the right word, but there's a new event in Pepin in the summer called Home at Laura's Place, and I have not been able to attend it. Please tell me all about it.
So one weekend a month, May through August, it's the second full weekend of each month, a group of us goes up and lives in the cabin at the wayside for the weekend. And I guess because I live in Pepin, I go home and sleep in my own bed. But several people stay in the cabin, and the cabin is fully furnished. So they're preparing meals, 19th century, both period-appropriate and season-appropriate meals. And a variety of different home crafts are being demonstrated, and it's just delightful.
It sounds delightful.
It started, actually, another thing that I've been involved in. We will sometimes have a birthday party up at the Little House Wayside. Laura's birthday is in February, so it's winter. And several years ago, we were up there. It was bitterly cold, not very well attended because it was so cold. But one of our demonstrators from Laura Ingalls Wilder days came with some friends, and her name is Nettie. She's kind of a visionary, and she looked at us in that cabin, and her eyes got big and bright, and she was just inspired to organize this home at Laura's place. So
in the summer.
In the summer, not in February.
Well, how has it been? What has the reaction been?
It's been growing. Now, this will be our fourth summer, I believe. The first couple years, it seemed like everybody we spoke to just happened to have stopped by that day, which was interesting because we would get 200 people through the cabin on a day when nobody was expecting anything special. Last year, the local Laura Ingalls Wilder Memorial Society actually put it on their website and promoted it a little more. And so more of the people who came were excited about seeing home at Laura's place. And the reception has been very good. And I guess one of the people on the Laura Ingalls Wilder Society board, he did some book examination and demonstrated that attendance at the museum really spiked the weekends we had home at Laura's place. So I would say the reception has been great, and it's always been a lot of fun because people are interested in many different aspects of Laura Ingalls Wilder. But I would have to say, as a group, the big circle around the whole Venn diagram of Laura Ingalls Wilder circles contains really nice people.
I would agree.
Always interested, appreciative. I guess the people who come are not often as disappointed to learn that there was no Albert. At the museum, I have talked to more people who were sort of surprised by that fact. But wherever they are, we don't need to rub it in that there's no Albert.
Mm-hmm.
Our premise is that we are the people who moved into the cabin after the Ingalls moved out. So we aren't presenting ourselves as Laura Ingalls Wilder authorities. But I think everybody who's there has read the books and read other books and has been driven by an interest in Laura Ingalls Wilder's life and certainly life and times.
How has Home at Laura's Place been refined since you started it? Or did you just hit it out of the park to begin with?
If anything, I feel like the refinement has been maybe a little bit in simplifying it. Nettie uses her pickup truck and a little trailer, and I feel like the first year she was way over furnishing the house and making it into a much bigger job. So by identifying which were the most important items of furniture and leaving some at home, it has been simplified. And I guess the same with food preparation. The family living at the cabin doesn't have to eat every single possible dish for that season, just enough to keep themselves from starving over the weekend. So again, it's simplifying.
I feel like Laura Ingalls Wilder would have something to say about the simple things in life.
Well, yes, that's right. And I like to roast a chicken every season, one weekend. I have a tin kitchen, which is illustrated by Garth Williams in the book Little House on the Prairie. It's a reflector oven.
Tin kitchen? So you're talking about a bake oven?
Well, it's a reflector oven, yes. And if you look at your Little House on the Prairie, you will see it. I can't tell you the page number, but there is such a thing.
I forgot to look this up while Kitty was still in the studio, so this is a post-edit insert. The Little House on the Prairie book that I am looking at is one from the blue set right now in the Garth Williams illustrated editions. So yes, that illustration is on page 207, and it's an illustration of a bake oven. The chapter is Fire in the Chimney. Presumably, based on the context, a duck is roasting in this oven. But as far as I can tell, there's not an actual mention in the text of this particular oven. I'm starting to think that maybe Kitty will need to talk more about tin in the Little House books in a future episode. And now back to Kitty. So, tell me more about how you see the Laura Ingalls Wilder fandom. What's your perspective on that?
Well, I guess I mentioned I see Laura myself. I see Laura Ingalls as a portal into the past. When when we read those books, we're seeing a world that she saw. I also, like with my research into Pepin history, there are many things that I know she saw that she didn't choose to write about. And it doesn't mean that they weren't there. They existed. That's kind of my interest, is in drawing out some of the other things that would be familiar to a person living in that time. Talking to people, I have realized that, there are many people, and I suppose when I read the books, I felt that way too, for whom Laura was a personal friend. But sometimes I feel like people are even a little jealous. No, she's my best friend. She can't have been your best friend.
That's my Laura.
Yes, right. And they see different things in her. I mean, your Laura is different from somebody else's Laura.
Exactly.
I have visited with a lot of people who maybe had some source of unhappiness in their life, but they took such comfort in that loving, connected family group, and that provided comfort at the time and a model of where they wanted to go. And I visit with a lot of people who use the Little House books as history lessons, which is valid, but I like to say, but there's more. I absolutely enjoy when I'm doing Home at Laura's Place, visiting with visitors from other countries, some who are residents of the U.S. now, and some who are just on vacation, but they have such interesting perspectives too. I guess last summer I visited with a man from Peru, and I asked if that the Little House, watching Little House on the Prairie, which he said they would all get together. They only had one TV in his village, so everybody would gather to watch Little House on the Prairie. But he said he watched Little House on the Prairie to learn about American history, and he watched Baywatch to learn about contemporary American life.
Oh, dear. And it must be such an interesting perspective to be able to meet with all of these people. You know, whenever visitors go, they just see the people that are there when they are, but you see them all.
Mm-hmm. And it's nice that Home at Laura's Place has been very relaxed. They'll sit and visit for a while. I can tell what I'm doing and talk about life in a log cabin in the 19th century as I imagine it. And
what might you be doing as you're visiting with somebody?
I have mostly been spinning wool into yarn there. And I get a chance then to hear their stories, and we share, which is also what the Little House books are all about. We form a community and we're sharing conversations, which is nice, face to face, person to person. Not that I set out planning a life full of Laura Ingalls Wilder, but it's been just an interesting trail to follow. And I imagine that we will keep it up, and I hope to see some of you this summer during Home at Laura's Place or at Laura Ingalls Wilder Days.
I hope they get there too, and I hope I do. Thank you so much, Kitty. This has been wonderful.
Thank you for having me. I said when you asked me, my goodness, I feel like I'm in such august company as the subject of your podcast.
Thank you. Well, that was Kitty Latané, longtime resident of Pepin, Wisconsin. She had a lot of compliments for the amazing women so dedicated to the village of Pepin over the past several decades. And I don't know about you, but my thought is that she herself is one of those amazing women. I hope that you can make it to Home at Laura's Place this summer. For dates, you can look at laurainglespepin.com or to Laura Ingalls Wilder Days, which in 2026 is the weekend of September 12th and 13th. You can find out more about that event, including Kitty's traditional craft demonstrators, at lauradays.org. Or heck, just go to Pepin whenever you can. It's lovely to visit anytime. Land of Laura is created and executive produced by me, Sandra Hume. Special thanks to Canadian folk punk band The Dreadnoughts for our theme music, and extra special thanks to all the guests, like Kitty, who give so generously of their time and knowledge. I hope to see you next time. Make sure you subscribe to Land of Laura on your favorite podcast channel so you can hear about episodes as soon as they drop. As Pa says, there's plenty more down cellar in a teacup, and as Ma might have said, it takes all kinds of people to make a Little House world.